The aim of practicing Nippon Kendo Kata is to study the principles and logic of the katana and improve technique in order to build character. By practicing the kata over and over again, one can learn proper etiquette and demeanor, understand the principles of the katana, and learn the reasons and logic of attack and defense. One can also develop a commanding presence and learn to read the opponent's mind and master the principles of kendo. When practicing the techniques, it's important to understand the rationale behind Nippon Kendo Kata. Let's go through the entire sequence from entrance to exit. Uchidachi and Shidachi bow to the kamiza and with Uchidachi leading proceed to the zare position. With back straight they walk using suriashi towards the zare position in a dignified manner. The zare should ideally be performed at the center of the shimoza. Uchidachi and Shidachi stand 3 steps apart facing each other and drawing the left foot back sit in seiza. The tsuba should be aligned with the knee. They simultaneously place both hands on the floor and slowly lower their heads. They then pick up their katana and, standing together, proceed to the Tachi no ma position about 9 steps apart. Shidachi lowers the knee furthest from the kamiza and places the Kodachi on the floor. Shidachi then proceeds to the Tachi no ma. They turn to the kamiza and perform a standing bow. They then face each other and exchange bows. Switching the katana to their left hands, they take 3 large steps forward, starting with the right foot, and assume the sonkyo position in migi shizentai. They draw their swords and cross the tips at around the yokote of the blade. They stand and assume chudan no kamae. They then lower the tips of their swords to release the kamae and return to the Tachi no ma position. There they adopt chudan, the kata for the tachi or long sword. Ippon me. Both assume jodan and advance as they try to seize the sen or initiative. Shidachi wins by sen-sen no sen, that is recognizing the start of Uchidachi's attack and immediately taking the initiative and making an attack. Nihon me. Both assume chudan and advance as they try to seize the sen. Shidachi wins by sen-sen no sen. Sanbon me. From gedan, they advance and try to seize the sen. Shidachi wins by sen-sen no sen. Yonhon me. From the yin-yang kamae, where Uchidachi assumes hasso and Shidachi wakigamae, they move forward. Shidachi wins by go no sen, a counterattack. 5本目 Uchidachi assumes Jodan and Shidachi Chudan. They advance and try to seize the Sen. Shidachi wins by Sensen no Sen. Ropponme. Uchidachi assumes Chudan and Shidachi Gedan. They advance and try to seize the Sen. Shidachi wins by Go no Sen. Nana honme. Both assume Chudan. They advance and try to seize the Sen. Shidachi wins by Go no Sen. After finishing the Tachi no Kata, they assume the Sonkyo position and sheathe their swords. They then return to their original positions. Holding their swords with their right hands, they bow to each other. Uchidachi continues to hold his sword in the right hand and assumes the Sonkyo position while waiting for Shidachi to exchange the Tachi for the Kodachi, or short sword. Uchidachi stands when Shidachi starts to return to the Tachi no Ma position. After bowing to each other, they switch their swords over to their left hands and move forward, starting with the right foot. They assume the Sonkyo position, draw their swords, and cross the tips. They stand and assume Chudan no Kamae, then lower their swords to release the Kamae, returning to the Tachi no Ma position. Kodachi no Kata, 1本目 2本目 3本目 After finishing the Kodachi no Kata, they assume the Sonkyo position and sheathe their swords. They then stand and return to their original positions. Holding their swords with their right hands, they bow to each other. They then bow to the kamiza. Shidachi steps back to retrieve the tachi, while Uchidachi proceeds to the zare position. Shidachi holds both swords and proceeds to the zare position. After performing zare, they pick up their swords and stand. Shidachi makes way for Uchidachi, then follows Uchidachi out of the dojo. In Kendo Kata, you must always walk in suriashi, with your back straight, look straight in front of you. Your left hand should be placed slightly towards the center of your body and should remain stationary. This is how to hold the Tachi and Kodachi. Hold the Kodachi with your right thumb and index finger, and place the Tachi between the index finger and remaining fingers. When kneeling, lower the left knee first. With the jimbu or blade edge turned towards you, place the katana on your right side. The tsuba should be aligned with your knee. Sit in seiza and look at your opponent. Place both hands on the floor simultaneously and lower your head. Stand right leg first and proceed to the Tachi no ma position. From the Tachi no ma, Shidachi takes about 5 steps back and lowers the knee facing shimoza and places the Kodachi on the floor. Hold the katana right below the tsuba with your right hand. The angle should be about 45 degrees. The rei or bow to the kamiza should be at an angle of about 30 degrees. Rei is a way to pay respect and should be done sincerely and not just as a matter of form. The rei to each other is a slight bow at an angle of about 15 degrees. It should be done in silence while contemplating the opponent. In the case of a bokuto, bring it to the center of your body and switch it over to your left hand with the thumb on the tsuba to hold it against your body. The tsukugashira, the bottom of the hilt, should come to your center line. In the case of a habiki or real sword, place your right thumb on the tsuba and simultaneously hold the kojiri with your left hand to insert the katana in your obi, so that the tsuba comes to the front of your navel. When assuming the sonkyo position, draw your left foot towards your right. While assuming sonkyo, draw your katana in an upward arc and cross swords at the yokote. Be sure not to swing the sword overhead. The sword should be crossed at the yokote. The yokote is indicated here. When releasing the kamae, the kenseng, or tip of the sword, should be lowered to about 3 or 6 centimeters below your opponent's knee. It should be pointing slightly to the left of your opponent's body. The chudan no kamae is the most fundamental of all stances, or kamae, in kendo. With the right foot forward, bring your left fist in front of the navel, leaving a distance of about 1 closed fist. The base of the left thumb should be at navel height. The toes of both feet should be pointing forward. The feet should be about a fist apart, with the tip of the left foot aligned with the right ankle. Grasp the bokuto from above with your left hand and wrap your little finger around the tsukugashira. In the case of a habiki, the left hand should generally grasp the tsuka above the makidome, while the right hand is positioned slightly below the tsuba. Both should stand at issoku itto no mae, a distance that enables them to strike by taking 1 step forward, or evade a strike by taking 1 step backward. The kensen should be pointed along an invisible line extending from the base of the tsuba through the kisaki to between the eyes or the left eye. Let's look at the main points of the Tachi and Kodachi. 1本目. Both assume jodan and advance towards each other. Uchidachi strikes shomen, but Shidachi averts this and strikes back at shomen. Shidachi then raises the sword to morote hidari jodan and shows zanshin. After allowing Shidachi plenty of time to show zanshin, Uchidachi straightens up and assumes chudan. For morote hidari jodan, step forward with your left and stand in hidari shizentai. The left fist is about a closed fist away and above the left forehead. The kenseng is pointing upwards and back at an angle of about 45 degrees, slightly towards the right. For morote migi jodan, bring your left fist in front and above your forehead at a distance of about 1 fist. The kenseng is pointing upwards and back at an angle of about 45 degrees and should be aligned with your center line. It's important that Uchidachi show enough kigamai to deliver a fast and strong men cut through the tsuka of Shidachi's sword. When Uchidachi's attack misses and swings through the air, Uchidachi loses balance slightly and leans forward, but still maintains eye contact. After delivering the strike, the kensen should be no lower than gedan. Shidachi steps back to evade the attack, and without pause counters with a strike with the monouchi of the blade. Shidachi forces Uchidachi back with the feeling of thrusting at the face and displays zanshin. Uchidachi draws the sword back before delivering the strike. The strike fails to reach shomen. The left foot is not drawn up properly. Shidachi has drawn the sword back too much. The kenseng is below fist level. There's a slight pause between the evading of the attack and the counter-strike. Shidachi thrusts the kensen into Uchidachi's face before raising the sword to jodan. Let's take a look at the correct movements from the other side. Nihonme. Both assume chudan and proceed towards each other. Unable to bear the pressure, Uchidachi attempts to strike Shidachi's kote. Uchidachi delivers a strike slightly lower than Shidachi's right kote. Shidachi lowers the kensen to about gedan and steps diagonally back to evade the strike. Then, with a large swing, strikes Uchidachi's kote. The path of the sword should be in a semicircle. Shidachi raises the sword high, so that he has a clear view of Uchidachi from between the arms and delivers one large strike. Zanshin is shown in spirit without any bodily motion. Both assume Chudang. When the sword is lifted overhead for the swing, the kensen is lower than the height of the fist. The downstroke is diagonal. The point at which the kote is made is too high. The point at which the kote is made is too low. Shidachi draws a semicircle with the sword. The strike is diagonal. Let's look at the correct movements. Sanbonme. Both assume gedan and proceed towards each other. Shidachi parries Uchidachi's thrust and immediately thrusts back to the chest. Shidachi closes in on Uchidachi with kuraizume, overpowering Uchidachi without actually thrusting, and raises the kensen to the center of the face to show zanshin. In gedan no kamae, the kensen is 3 to 6 centimeters below the opponent's kneecap. When approaching ma'ai, both raise their swords to chudang as they try to overwhelm each other with their strength of spirit. Uchidachi seizes the opportunity to strike and turns the blade slightly to the right so that the shinogi is to the left and thrusts at Shidachi's suigetsu or solar plexus. Shidachi turns the body away and tilts the blade slightly to the right using the left shinogi to parry Uchidachi's thrust and then immediately thrusts back towards Uchidachi's solar plexus. Shidachi presses forward, starting with the left foot, to overwhelm Uchidachi without actually thrusting, and then raises the kensen to the center of Uchidachi's face to show zanshin. The position of the hands is too high. The left foot has not been drawn up properly. When parrying the thrust, the left fist is not on the center line. Shidachi tries to parry and weaken the thrust with the hands without turning the body. It's a double thrust. After pressing forward with kuraizume, Shidachi thrusts the kensen in Uchidachi's face. And now the correct movements. Yonhonme. Uchidachi steps forward in hasso no kamae, and Shidachi steps back in wakigamae. They strike at each other's shomen and cross swords. They naturally assume chudang. Shidachi dodges Uchidachi's thrust to the right lung by simultaneously raising the left fist above the head and pointing the tip of the sword backward in makikaishi and strikes Uchidachi's shomen. Shidachi displays zanshin and returns to where they cross swords, stepping back with the right foot first. Let's look at the different kamae. For hasso no kamae, take one step forward with your left and bring your sword up to morote hidari jodan. Your left fist is on the center line. The tsuba is at mouth level about 1 fist away. The sword is pointing backward at an angle of about 45 degrees. The edge of the blade is turned towards Shidachi. For wakigamae, turn the body back to the right into hidari hammi. Bring the sword down to below the right armpit in a large motion so that the right fist passes in front of the mouth. The left fist should be positioned at the lower right of the navel. The tip of the sword points backward with the blade turned towards lower right. The kensen should be slightly lower than in gedan no kamae. When assuming the kamae, be sure that Uchidachi cannot see the blade of the sword. Both participants extend their arms and strike at each other's shomen in one blow. After crossing swords, Uchidachi seizes the opportunity to thrust at Shidachi's right lung. Shidachi parries the thrust and raises the sword overhead so that the blade points to the rear in makikaishi and strikes Uchidachi's shomen in a single motion. Uchidachi's kensen should be slightly below level, with the edge of the blade turned to the right. Shidachi parries Uchidachi's thrust by stepping to the left and raises the sword overhead so that the blade points to the rear in makikaishi. The timing is very important. If after crossing swords the ma'ai is too close, Uchidachi retreats slightly. After receiving Shidachi's makikaishi, Uchidachi will lose balance slightly and will lean forward, but continues to maintain eye contact. The point at which their swords cross is too high. They should be crossing swords at chudan with such force as if to grind the shinogi of each other's swords. The right foot is not positioned properly behind the left. The kensen is too high and is not thrusting at the right lung. After thrusting, Uchidachi fails to maintain eye contact. Let's review the correct movements. Gohonme. Uchidachi assumes jodan and Shidachi chudan as they move towards each other. Uchidachi strikes shomen as if to cut through to Shidachi's chin. Shidachi deflects the blow by swinging the sword upward with suriage, as if drawing an arc with the tip of the sword, and strikes Uchidachi's shomen in a single motion. Shidachi lowers the kensen to Uchidachi's face, steps back with the right foot, and raises the sword to morote hidari jodan to show zanshin. As Uchidachi raises the sword to jodan, Shidachi steps forward with the right foot and presses the kensen against Uchidachi's left fist and assumes chudan. Uchidachi strikes Shidachi's shomen as if to cut down to the chin. Shidachi deflects this blow using the left side of the sword, swinging it upwards with hidari suriage, making sure that the kensen does not point down. In a single motion, Shidachi follows with a strike. Shidachi is deflecting the strike with a harai technique instead of suriage. The kensen is lower than both fists. Shidachi points the kensen to the center of Uchidachi's face and steps back with the right foot to show zanshin. And now for the correct movements. Ropponme. Uchidachi takes Chudan and Shidachi Gedan. They move towards each other, and after an initial engagement, Uchidachi delivers a kote strike. Shidachi deflects this with suriage and strikes kote. Shidachi then shows zanshin. Both move from their right foot and assume Chudan, returning to the position at which they cross swords. Uchidachi takes Chudan and Shidachi Gedan. As they approach Mae, Shidachi puts pressure on Uchidachi by raising the kensen as if to strike Uchidachi's fists. Just as their swords are about to cross, Uchidachi raises the sword in Morote Hidari Jodan and prevents Shidachi from pursuing the attack. As Uchidachi attempts to strike a small kote, Shidachi raises the sword in a small arc and with one motion strikes Uchidachi's right kote. Instead of coming face to face with Shidachi, Uchidachi, turning the blade diagonally to the right and lowering the kensang, steps back diagonally to the left. With the right shinogi, Shidachi deflects Uchidachi's strike with suriage, as if drawing a small arc with the sword, and in one motion strikes kote. Uchidachi uses a harai technique instead of suriage. Uchidachi is face to face with Shidachi when stepping back. Let's take another look at the correct movements. Nanahomme. Both assume Chudan. Shidachi receives Uchidachi's thrust by thrusting forwards and upwards and then returns to Chudan. Shidachi then avoids Uchidachi's strike to shomen by moving to the side and strikes Uchidachi's right door. From wakigamai, Shidachi swings the sword overhead while turning to the left and faces Uchidachi. Both then return to the position where they first crossed swords in ayumiyashi. Uchidachi seizes the opportunity and, taking a small step forward, thrusts at Shidachi's chest while twisting the sword shinogi into Shidachi's sword. Uchidachi then steps forward with the left, then right foot to strike Shidachi's shomen. After Shidachi evades the strike, Uchidachi's balance is slightly broken. Uchidachi then recovers the balance and swings the sword up, coming face to face with Shidachi. When receiving Uchidachi's thrust, Shidachi's monouchi should be at about shoulder height. As Uchidachi steps forward with the left, then right foot to strike shomen, Shidachi moves to the side while maintaining eye contact and strikes Uchidachi's right door. Upon finishing the strike, Shidachi is on the right knee. The right arm and sword should be parallel to the floor. After a slight pause, Shidachi then assumes wakigamai and shows zanshin. The point at which the swords cross is too high and lacks spirit. Uchidachi swings the sword up after Shidachi assumes wakigamai. Now for the correct movements. Having finished the Tachi no Kata, both assume the Sonkyo position and sheathe their swords. They then return to their original positions. They now remove their swords from their obi. In the case of Bokuto, the sword is switched over to the right in the center of the body. In the case of a habiki sword, the left hand pushes the sword slightly to the right front. Place the index finger of your right hand over the tsuba, and with your thumb and other fingers, grasp the sword near the koiguchi. Extend your arm and hold the sword by your side. Shidachi steps backwards to where the Kodachi was placed. Uchidachi holds the sword in the right hand and waits in the Sonkyo position. Shidachi kneels at the Shimoza and exchanges the Tachi for the Kodachi. Uchidachi stands as Shidachi starts to return to the Tachi no Ma. After exchanging rei, they switch their swords over to their left in Taito, and after taking a large step forward with their right, advance to Ma'ai and assume the Sonkyo position to cross swords. They both stand. Shidachi places the left hand against the waist, thumb backward. When using a habiki, Shidachi lightly grips the kurigata, thumb forward. From Chudang, Shidachi lowers the kensen and allows the left hand to fall naturally to the side to release the kamae. He then returns to Tachi no Ma. Kodachi no Kata, Ipponme. From Morote Hidari Jodan, Uchidachi strikes Shomen. Shidachi deflects this by turning slightly to the right with Uke Nagashi and immediately strikes Shomen. Shidachi takes one step back and shows Zanshin. Both assume Chudang and return to where they first crossed swords. The Chudan Hanmi no Kamae, in response to Jodan, is assumed by placing the right foot slightly forward and drawing the left shoulder back. The kensen is at the level of the center of Uchidachi's face. As the two approach Ma'ai, Shidachi steps sideways with the aim of entering into Irimi. Uchidachi responds by striking Shomen in a single motion without first doing a backward movement. Irimi means to apply physical and mental pressure and enter into the opponent's range. Shidachi turns the body to the right and raises the right hand overhead. Gripping the sword lightly, Shidachi deflects the strike with the left shinogi with Uke Nagashi and strikes Shomen. Shidachi uses a light grip and with the blade turned backwards, deflects the blow with Uke Nagashi and counters, making sure that the point at which the strike is parried is not too low. The Uke Nagashi technique is not done overhead. Shidachi adopts Zanshin automatically without thinking. And now let's review the correct movements. Nihonme. Shidachi presses forward with the aim of entering into Irimi. Uchidachi responds by assuming wakigamae and raises the sword overhead to strike Shomen. Shidachi deflects this with Uke Nagashi and strikes Shomen. Shidachi then restrains Uchidachi's arm above the elbow and displays Zanshin. Uchidachi steps back from the left foot and Shidachi from the right to assume Chudang, after which they return to where they first crossed swords. The Chudan Hanmi no Kamae in response to Gedang is assumed by placing the right foot slightly forward, drawing back the left shoulder with the kensen at Uchidachi's chest level. From Wakigamae, Uchidachi strikes Shomen in a single motion. When performing Uke Nagashi, it's important to raise the right hand overhead and use the right shinogi. Shidachi restrains Uchidachi's arm above the elbow and shows Zanshin. At the same time, Shidachi turns the blade down to the right and points the kensen at Uchidachi's throat. When showing zanshin, Shidachi closes in too much. Shidachi restrains Uchidachi's sword while returning to the original position. Let's review the correct movements. Sanbonme. Shidachi assumes Gedan Hanmi and moves towards Uchidachi, who attacks with a strike to shomen. Shidachi deflects this with Suriage, Suriotoshi, Surinagashi and Surikomi. Shidachi then restrains Uchidachi's arm above the elbow and shows zanshin. To assume Gedan Hanmi no Kamae, place the right foot slightly forward, draw the left shoulder back, and lower the kensen to the same height as that of the Gedan no Kamae for the Tachi. As the Uchidachi steps forward with the right, left and then right, Shidachi aims to enter into Irimi. This forces Uchidachi to raise the sword overhead and strike shomen. Shidachi should conduct the Suriage, Suriotoshi, Surinagashi and Surikomi movements correctly. In Suriage, Shidachi deflects Uchidachi's strike by swinging the sword upward as if to draw an arc. In Suriotoshi, Shidachi slides the sword downwards to the base of Uchidachi's tsuba. Surinagashi is conducted straight across from that position at stomach level. In Surikomi, Shidachi restrains Uchidachi's sword by sliding the shinogi down to the base of the tsuba in a twisting motion. As soon as Shidachi finishes the Surikomi, the wrist is cocked so that both habaki are locked at a right angle. Let's take another look at that entire sequence. When stepping forward with the left foot, the sword is raised overhead. The twisting is overdone and Shidachi has come in too close. Shidachi restrains Uchidachi's sword while returning to the original position. Now for the correct movements. Finally, let's look at a demonstration of Nippon Kendo Kata using a habiki blade instead of a bokuto. In practicing Kendo Kata, it's important to follow the protocol before and after Tachi and master all 5 kamae for the Tachi and also the Kodachi Hammi no kamae. Uchidachi and Shidachi should understand each other's roles and work in harmony, with Uchidachi always initiating the action. In Tachi no Kata, Uchidachi strikes upon seeing the right opportunity, whereas in Kodachi no Kata, Uchidachi strikes in response to Shidachi's intent to enter into Idimo. It's essential to understand the reasons and logic behind this. Uchidachi should aim to strike or thrust from the fundamental spatial distance of Issoku Ito no Ma'ai, while Shidachi should aim to strike and thrust accurately with the Mono Uchi. When showing Zanshin, regardless of whether it involves physical action, it's important to display strength or a commanding presence.